Sutekh, who is he? Well, after the episode The Legend of Ruby Sunday, you might actually want that question answered, and today I'll answer that in this video. Because I was also fascinated myself, I have recently watched the serial Pyramids of Mars from the 4th Doctor, the first and only story containing Sutekh in the mainline show. And I'm going to be going through that episode discussing everything that needs to be discussed relating to this recent finale. So let's just hop straight into it. So if you're somewhat familiar with Sutekh and who he is, you might know him by this image here, which is a lot different to the dog-like design that we see in the episode The Legend of Ruby Sunday. Well, in this serial, early on in the episode, the TARDIS is shaken up and a mysterious dog-like face floats in the TARDIS and disappears. This face we learn later to be Sutekh's, and it is dog-like. It's not necessarily identical to the one that we see in The Legend of Ruby Sunday, but it's very similar, and it's clearly just a redesign for modern audiences. Now, this has nothing to do with what we're discussing, but the first bad guy in this episode is wearing a fez. The 11th Doctor did not get his interest of fezzes from this guy, but I had to point that out. Now, moving on, this place is actually set in a location called the Priory. We learn that the Priory is actually the site and building of UNIT from the classic era, just before UNIT moved in. And at the end of the episode, when the Doctor defeats Sutekh, there's a fire that is caused, and it turns out that the fire that burned down the Priory was in fact the Doctor's fault, and so they speed on out of there. And as someone who has only seen the first Doctor's era beyond this episode, it's quite funny because he is also responsible for the fire of Rome, and so the Doctor needs to calm down and stop saying these fires. We also get a reference to Marie Antoinette, which, if you remember, is the person from The Girl in the Fireplace from David Tennant's second series. Now, obviously, this reference came before that era, but we learned that the Doctor has one of her French lockpicks and that she ended up losing her head, which kind of means The Girl in the Fireplace is a direct retcon. As the Doctor is talking in this episode, we learn that in fact Sutekh is defeated by the god of light in Egyptian mythology, which is the god called Horus, and we learn in this episode that that is who originally trapped Sutekh in his prison. In this episode, Sutekh has a servant and only one servant, and this servant is able to give people the gift of death from Sutekh, which is important for The Legend of Ruby Sunday, because I'm pretty sure that is who Harriet is playing, considering she is the harbinger for Sutekh, and so that makes you wonder who actually is Susan Twist playing, because we know it was a ploy to get the Doctor here, but with how her dreams were manipulating time, she could actually be some other figure that we just don't know about yet, meaning she might still have a bigger part to play in the finale than we actually realize. Now, in this episode, Sutekh has these robot mummy minions that go around killing all the humans left in the area, and these mummies actually have these red diamond-like gemstones sticking out their backs, and this gemstone is so reminiscent of the one we see in the Sutekh dog-like face in The Legend of Ruby Sunday, placed in the middle of his forehead. It's almost identical, and so I think that's just a nice nod back to those old designs. I have told you that Sutekh has been in prison this whole serial, but I haven't told you how he is able to control his servant or his mummies, and it's heavily implied in this episode he just does that mentally, and this is really impressive when the only way from where Sutekh currently is to where the Doctor is through a time tunnel, and is still able to fully control them and know where they're moving. The way Sutekh's being kept in prison is via a beam coming from a pyramid on Mars, and the way that Sutekh's servants try and free him is by sending a rocket to Mars to destroy this signal. And Sutekh's telepathy and mind control is so strong that when the Doctor and Sarah Jane plant an explosive on the rocket, he is able to contain the explosion for minutes. Although it looks like it's a struggle for him, he stops that blast from happening. Knowing he's capable of that means that Kate and Morris, they are done for in UNIT. If they somehow escape out of that situation, I will be impressed. However, this means there is a way for them to distract him long enough to be beaten. And so, whilst he is all powerful, he's not unbeatable. When the Doctor later confronts Sutekh in his prison, we learn that Sutekh is essentially not just the god of death, but the god of life. Although we shouldn't necessarily trust everything that Sutekh says, he says he can essentially choose when the Doctor lives, prolonging his life or ending him now, even going as far as choosing how he dies, which to me is crazy. What's even more insane is he can do this all while imprisoned. He currently cannot move and is paralyzed in this prison, and yet he is still able to bring the Doctor to his knees and end up mind controlling him. Later in this episode, Sutekh's servant causes the Doctor to get out of this mind control, and although that happens, Sutekh still manages to win. His servant is able to destroy the Pyramid of Mars signal, and in doing so, he kills Scarman, the character he's been controlling the whole episode. However, what's really interesting is he actually dies in the exact same way as Colonel Chidozi in The Legend of Ruby Sunday, the guy that turned to sand in the time window room. At the end of the 4 parts, Sutekh is destroyed by trying to go through the time tunnel and reach the Doctor, and the Doctor expanded extending the end of this time tunnel to years in the future, to the point where Sutekh cannot physically live long enough to get to the other side. Because of this, it's presumed in the episode that Sutekh has died and not made it here. However, visually, we just see him fade outwards at the back of the tunnel. Now, I know this doesn't mean anything guaranteed, but some of the last words Sutekh says are, "I shall destroy you." And yes, he said that towards the Doctor. And now he is finally here. And he is definitely wanting to live up to that promise. Now, that is all the official canon of Sutekh. That's everything that's within the TV show that we know about. Yes, you have the spin-offs of the audio dramas and the books, and people will count that as canon, but because of how many stories there are out there and how some probably contradict the show, this is all you're going to need for that episode, I can guarantee. Now, why not end this video with a little bit of a theory? So, one key detail I forgot to tell you about how the Doctor defeats Sutekh is that he uses part of the TARDIS's console to elongate the time tunnel. And I think that's potentially what allows Sutekh to get into the TARDIS eventually. I think that what happened is, because of the TARDIS's involvement in elongating the time tunnel, I now think that when he exits that time tunnel, because of the involvement of the piece of the TARDIS, he will then come out the other side next to or near that piece of the TARDIS. He made sure to hide himself within it so that he can prepare himself for destroying the Doctor when the time comes. This isn't necessarily a foolproof theory, as a lot of things that happen in this episode and The Legend of Ruby Sunday, they're a bit vague, but the time tunnel isn't a direct door-to-door time tunnel, as when the Fourth Doctor goes to visit Sutekh, he just pops up in a random part of the tomb in front of where Sutekh is kept. He doesn't actually come through a door. And so I think it's perfectly feasible that when he exits on this end, it could just be in a random location by this part of the TARDIS. But any of you who are fans of the classic era, or seen any of the audio dramas or books and know more about Sutekh, please comment down below some of your theories. I'd love to read them and see what other people have ideas on. I would just love to see some true Sutekh fans' ideas on how he can return to the show. Anyway, that is all I have for you today. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.